So today we will be recapping Wistoria Wand and Sword episode 2 as though undaunted. So in this episode we start back 5 years earlier and a depressed Will is hearing his classmates talk about how he doesn't have any magic. It is also mentioned that how he was only admitted to the school as bait to get Lady Alfaria to the school. Will and Professor Wachner are in the headmaster's office and Headmaster Cauldron Anuve tests Will and he quickly responds and pushes Wachner out of the way as he fights against her magic. The headmistress is impressed and allows him to stay in the academy. Will asks if he would be able to ascend the tower if he is strong enough to be with Elfie. Professor Wachner is given a class on ascending the tower. He tells them that it generally means ascending to the upper institute. There are two ways to become a Magyavanda. The first is to create a new type of magic, and the second is to learn at least 7,200 credits at the academy. Most students have to rely on the latter method to advance. Will is now walking in the halls with Colette, talking about the class they just had with Professor Wachner. They come across a crowd of students which are surrounding Sion, where his two cronies are talking about Sion defeating the evil sentinel. Sion doesn't say anything when they're doing this and is instead thinking back on Will's battle with the evil sentinel, and he looks up and sees Will and gets in his face before walking away. Professor Edward has gone to visit the headmaster. He wants to expel Will despite it being his last year and him nearly graduating. He is still annoyed about what Wachner told him about Will being able to surpass magic. The headmaster tells Professor Edward that if it wasn't for his lack of magic, he excels to a degree that calling it mere excellence wouldn't be enough. Professor Edward's issue with Will is not that he wants to become a learned scholar, but that he wants to become a Magyavanda. The headmaster tells Professor Edward to test Will. He can test him personally, and that she will leave the contents of the test to him, as well as the matter of Will's advancement or expulsion will also be left to Professor Edward. She leaves it to Professor Edward as he understands the Magyavanda better than anyone else, as she calls him the Dark Viper Mage. Will has to depend on Colette to get in and out of his locker due to him not having magic to lock and unlock said locker. In a study hall, Will is writing about the Battle of Gavaronzo. The Dwarfs from another world were not happy with how they were being treated. The Dwarfs raised an army to go to war. They had no magic and they were no match for the magic users. While studying, Colette sees Will has grey hair and offers to put it out for him. Professor Edward appears and tells Will to go to the spell hall alone immediately, which he does. He claims to be giving Will a supplemental lesson as Will continues to fail spell work. Professor Edward wastes no time in casting magic. He tells Will he only has to land a single hit on him. He is not allowed to refuse this, and if he lands a hit, he will be awarded 5 credits. If he fails to land a hit on him, however, he will be expelled. Professor Wachner has been called to the headmaster's office. She tells him that Professor Edward is testing Will and that he is forbidden from getting involved. We see Professor Edward firing spell after spell at Will, which he is managing to dodge. We find out that Professor Edward is the closest to becoming a Magyavanda, having been one before he was defeated. Will tries to break through Professor Edward's shields with a flying kick, which fails. Professor Edward begins firing multiple spells at once at Will, who struggles to avoid being hit. Will is thrown around the spell hall and Will thinks to himself if only he had his sword. Colette is at the lockers when she is approached by an injured Kiki who signals to Colette to open Will's locker. Professor Edward approaches Will and asks how many mages were needed to annihilate the 10,000 dwarven warriors. He is adamant that a sword can't reach a wand and tells Will to abandon his aspirations. Will refuses to give up everything he is doing so that he can be with the person he loves. He wants to keep his promise to Elfie. Professor Edward is ready to resume the test when Colette throws Will his sword. The second part of the fight is different from the first half and Will is able to slice through Professor Edward's magic. He runs towards Professor Edward and manages to dodge the magic fired at him before slicing through Professor Edward's shield and then slicing him just a little bit on his face. Professor Edward reluctantly awards Will his 5 credits. Colette runs up to a tired Will. Professor Wachner and the headmaster discuss the fight that they just witnessed. Back in the dorms, we see someone cooking food and they are wondering where Will is and notes that Will is late home. So, in regards to this episode, again, we start to learn a little bit more about the world and how there are only two ways in order to get to become a Magyavanda. One being that you create your own spell, which apparently is so hard that most students have to rely on earning enough credits in order to advance. And considering there seems to only be like 5 people at a time, I'm guessing it's really hard to get the required amount of credits at the same time. They need someone that excels in every level of, their classes, well, in order to even advance. In regards to Will's fight with Professor Edward, I think Professor Edward took the mick. Like, I get you wanting to test him and you're trying to get him out and you're trying to show how unfair it is anyway. But if you are that secure in your ability to be able to, get rid of Will with just magic alone, you should allow the man to have the tools that he relies on, just like you're relying on your wand. Like, you've gone there with your wand in order to battle Will, and Will hasn't got his sword, which you know is what he would use. Because if it was like a magic fight, you're not going to say to the other person, oh, don't bring your wand, it's just me. I'm going to have my wand and it's your job to, like, survive what I'm firing at you and land a hit. But yet you're not letting Will get his sword, his weapon of choice. Was you scared because you saw what he did with the evil sentinel, so you didn't want him to come at you with his sword because you knew full well with the degree of magic that you was using as a handicap that he would beat you? I don't know. But then it also makes me a bit curious because they said that you was, already at the top of the tower before you descended. And I know you was only using like low level spells, which still was high magic for yourself. What would your high level magic do against Will with his sword? Would he still struggle or would he be able to take you on with no issue? I'm hoping at some point we will get to see that, but we'll have to keep on watching and find out what happens. Anyway, that is it for this recap. I hope you stay tuned for the next one, as well as, watch the next episode. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.